Hello again. My name is Livi Michael. I'm the author of 20 books, one PhD thesis, several articles and short stories, and a play. I also run a podcast about short stories called Small Pleasures, together with short story writer and translator Sonia Moore. I've taught creative writing for over 30 years and had an even longer relationship with the publishing industry. In that time, the world of publishing has changed dramatically, and I wanted to talk about some of those changes and their impact on writers today. I thought I'd begin by talking about my own story. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who wanted to be a writer. Many of you will be familiar with this story, although for you it might begin with a little boy or a small non-binary person. Anyway, I remember declaring my ambition to my mother when I was about 6 or 7 years old and being told in no uncertain terms that I would need a proper job. Weirdly prophetic, my mother. I didn't come from the kind of background where being a writer was considered possible. I grew up on a council estate in Greater Manchester. So, as many writers do, I wrote in secret throughout my teens, not showing it to anyone, rarely finishing what I started. Aged 18, I plucked up enough courage to send my first full-length piece of fiction to a proper publisher. I waited and waited, and eventually it came back with a standard rejection letter. I was duly devastated. It took me a couple of years to recover enough to send off a second novel, only to be devastated again when it was rejected again. So far, so absolutely ordinary. I began my third novel at 24. It took 6 years to complete, and in the process I had 1 or 2 short pieces, poems and short stories, accepted for publication. Some of them by a community publisher called Common Word, which launched many writers' careers. Then I found an agent. This was exciting, but the real overwhelming thrill came when my first novel, actually my third, was accepted for publication 7 years after I'd started writing it. Moreover, it was accepted by 2 publishing companies, Secker and Warburg and Jonathan Cape, at the same time. My agent had a good relationship with both, but I chose Secker and Warburg, not because I knew anything about them, shamefully. I think I chose them because they responded first. Now I know that Secker and Warburg started off as 2 small publishing companies owned by Frederick Warburg and Martin Secker. These 2 men merged their companies in 1936 to become Secker and Warburg and went on to publish anti-fascist, anti-Soviet and political fiction by George Orwell, D.H. Lawrence, Thomas Mann and Franz Kafka, among others. Paper shortages and bombing during World War II and economic problems afterwards led to Secker and Warburg being taken over by the Heinemann Group in 1951. In 1985, Heinemann were bought by the Octopus Publishing Group, which was in turn bought by Reed International, now Reed Elsevier, in 1987. In 1997, Random House bought the adult trade division of Reed International, which included Secker and Warburg. In 2005, Secker and Warburg merged with the Harville Press to become Harville Secker. The Harville Press was originally founded in 1946 by 2 women, Manya Harari and Marjorie Villiers. It went through a similar process of being bought out by William Collins and Sons, which in 1989 merged with the American publishers Harper and Row to form HarperCollins. Then HarperCollins was bought by Random House in 2002. 3 years later came the merger with Secker and Warburg to create Harville's Secker. In 2013, Random House merged with Penguin Books in what was then the publishing world's biggest ever merger to form the British-American multinational publishing company Penguin Random House. Are you dizzy yet? Publishing is a complex, dynamic and fast-moving world. It's hard to keep up with all the changes. I'm telling this story because what happened to Secker and Warburg is typical of what has happened to most small publishing companies over the course of the 20th century. The battle to survive usually ends in a corporate merger with one of the big five publishing firms: Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, HarperCollins, Hachette. None of these publishing corporations is owned in the UK, and all of them have an international focus. What happened to me in all this is also, I think, fairly typical of what happened to many writers. When my first novel was published in 1992, I was, I think, incredibly naive. This was before the proliferation of creative writing courses that usually provide students with some knowledge about the industry. But I really had no idea about publishing or even what it meant to be an author. Again, before the days when many school children meet at least one. In my innocence, I imagined a long-term relationship with a single publishing firm and an editor who would patiently support me through the gradual rise of my career. Historically, there have been such relationships between the British editor Diana Athill and Jean Rhys, for instance, or Frederick Warburg and George Orwell, or the legendary American editor Maxwell Perkins and Ernest Hemingway, that they do seem to have disappeared sometime in the late 20th century. I've already mentioned that publishing my first novel was probably the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. It's embarrassing to say this now, but I thought I had arrived. Especially after winning an award, I believed my future as a writer was secure. However, shortly after publication, my original editor at Secker and Warburg left to work for Jonathan Cape, taking some of his list with him, but not me. He hadn't liked what he'd seen of my second novel. This was the first of a series of rude awakenings. The second was when my agent left to pursue a different career. However, I got on well enough with the editor I was assigned to at Secker and Warburg and was pleased when my second novel also won an award. I found a new agent who'd sold my third novel to Vintage in 1996. Vintage Publishing UK had been owned by Random House since 1960, and in 2013 it too became part of the huge corporation Penguin Random House. I continued to publish adult novels and books for children with various imprints of Penguin Random House, working with several different editors. At one point, it seemed as though every time I phoned up, my editor had changed. My last book with Penguin Random House was published in 2016. So this was my introduction to the volatile nature of publishing. I should say that almost everyone I worked with was excellent, thorough, professional, insightful, despite the various pressures they were under. I do remember one particular book where the editor changed 3 times and each one wanted something different doing with it, which was problematic. But in general, I can say that I got on well with the professionals I worked with and was invariably sorry when each person moved on. Meanwhile, however, there were other changes for writers to contend with. In 1997, the Net Book Agreement ended. This meant that books could be sold at varying prices by multiple retailers, which considerably affected author royalties. Also by then, the rise of the internet and the multiple technology company Amazon had brought revolutionary changes to the industry. And now, of course, there is AI to consider as well. It would take too long to analyse all the implications of these developments for writers in this short episode. Fortunately, there are several excellent books that do just that. One of my favourites is Alison Baverstock's How to Market Books. Buy the latest edition to keep up with all the recent developments. Or The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, which offers an exploration of the impact of AI. All I want to do here is to highlight a few of the key changes that have happened as a result of successive corporate mergers and the internet. One of these is the disappearance of the mid-list, which is where I was as a writer, not yet famous, certainly not best-selling, but respectably reviewed. I was on the mid-list until 2016, when my poor sales record effectively ended my publishing career, with mainstream publishing at least. Part of the reason for the demise of the mid-list is increased pressure on publishers to prioritise high-selling blockbuster titles, leading to less space and resources dedicated to books with only a moderate sales potential. This shift is driven by factors like online retail algorithms, which favour popular books, and the overall focus on maximising profits in the publishing industry. The same trend has also seen the rise of sales and marketing departments in publishing houses. In 1992, I'm sure Secker and Warburg had a sales and marketing department, but I wasn't aware of it. The focus was very much on my relationship with my editor, who had considerable authority within the firm. He had his own list of authors and was very much in control of who he published. These days, sales and marketing departments commonly dictate who or what an editor can publish. I know at least one editor who left because she was tired of being dictated to by the head of marketing, a man who apparently was very proud of the fact that he never read any book. Most editors have to convince their marketing departments that the manuscript they like will be worth publishing in terms of sales. If they're successful, the marketing department will then allocate a budget to it. This allocation will depend in part on a data provider called the Nielsen Book Scan, which tracks book sales by collecting point of sales information from retailers. So if you are an author with a backlist, it will track how well each of your books has done in terms of sales. It's much harder for an editor to persuade a marketing department that a particular novel should be published if the writer has a backlist of novels that haven't sold well. When I was programme leader of the MA in Publishing at Manchester Metropolitan University, I spoke to a number of editors who came to talk to the students. They all confirmed that if a published author sent them a new manuscript, the first thing they would do was to check the sales information of their previous books. If it wasn't good, they wouldn't necessarily even read the manuscript before rejecting it. So if your book has been rejected, it might not mean that it isn't good enough. It might mean that it hasn't even been read. There were one or two who said they would read a manuscript regardless, and if they loved it, they would fight for it. But even if they won the fight, the Nielsen data would affect how much money would be given for publicity or for an advance. Publicity budgets vary from hundreds of thousands of pounds to nothing at all. Zero. Zilch. These days, the biggest budgets tend to go to those who are already celebrities or who have huge followings on social media. In this sense, marketing departments are risk averse. Many titles are published that have no publicity budget attached to them. Then, of course, writers are dropped when their books don't sell very well. If this has happened to you, you're not alone. In fact, I would say that it's rapidly becoming the most common experience in publishing. The old situation where an editor could determine which authors they could keep has gone forever. These days, it's marketing and data analysis that calls the shots. Of course, publishing is an industry like any other and has to compete in the commercial field. However, some would say that the industry overpublishes. In the UK alone, figures suggest that as many as 200,000 books are published each year. The upside is that more people have a chance of having their work published. The downside is that it's far less easy to maintain a writing career for more than one or two books. One of the consequences of this economic policy is that writers have become responsible not just for writing, but also publicising and marketing their work and turning themselves into a brand, someone who produces a body of work that's easily identifiable. There are many articles in The Guardian and elsewhere in which writers talk about being burnt out by their sales and marketing activities, posting, touring, writing articles, sending out newsletters, appearing at book fairs, arranging their own launches and online talks, etc. They invest a significant proportion of their own income in self-promotion, sometimes even buying their own books to move them up the bestseller lists. Many are dismayed by how little return there is. Recently, I attended an online seminar about book marketing for authors, in which a number of interesting and creative ideas were put forward for developing a presence on social media. At the end of the presentation, someone finally asked the question I was hoping to ask, which was, did all this social media activity actually make a difference to sales? And the presenter had to admit that it didn't. There is no evidence linking social media activity to increase sales. So much for all the hours you've spent trying to train your kitten to roller skate for TikTok. But whose job is it to sell books? One might think it's the job of these same sales and marketing departments that have assumed such importance within publishing firms. However, while the publishing industry does a good job of actually producing books, it seems to be rather less good at selling them, as the recent story of the attempted merger between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster demonstrates. In 2022, Penguin Random House tried to merge with Simon & Schuster so that two huge publishing corporations would become one, but the American government stepped in, objecting to what they said would become a monopoly. In the ensuing court case, some interesting data emerged. The figures suggested that Penguin Random House had published 58,000 print titles in the previous year, but had managed to sell fewer than 12 copies of 50% of them. Yes, 12. This data has been disputed, of course, but still the numbers appear to be shockingly low. Some figures suggest that 25% sell less than 12 and 50% less than 99. Still, as someone who has been published by Penguin Random House in the past, as well as by independents and by myself, I can say with some certainty that I can sell more than 12 copies of my own books. So what's happening here? The publishing world have adopted a business model that has been compared to drilling for oil. There are rare hits that are extremely lucrative, but the results are unpredictable, and 99 times out of 100, it doesn't work. Meanwhile, publicity budgets continue to be allocated to the big writers and to celebrities or those with a massive following on social media. It seems that sales and marketing departments are good at promoting that which will already sell. For the rest of us, poor sales lead to decreasing advances and frequently to being dropped by publishers. The dominance of sales and marketing and the Nielsen book scan over editorial seems to set up a cycle of diminishing returns for most authors. Although I should also say that some titles that do have respectable publicity budgets attached to them don't always do as well as hoped. There is a mystery attached to sales that no one seems to have cracked yet. If anyone does, I'm sure it will make them very rich. So where does that leave most writers? In my experience, there are two main reasons why writers want to be published. One is to be read. The other is to earn a living from writing so they can devote themselves to it professionally. The publishing industry doesn't seem to be efficient in terms of finding a readership for authors, and in terms of income, the news is only bad. In the past few years, author incomes have steadily declined. In 2006, the average income from writing was £12,330 a year, still not a living wage. But in 2022, it was £7,000. A 60.2% decrease. By contrast, publishing revenues have steadily increased. Globally, in 2022, the publishing industry brought in $76 billion, which was expected to reach $91.98 billion in 2024. This is a 30% increase. In the UK economy, publishing revenues have also grown over the past few years. Profits exceeded £7.1 billion for the first time in 2023 and are expected to grow by a further 20% in the next 10 years. In other words, the industry is doing a good job for itself, but not for its authors, apart from the tiny percentage of writers to make the bestseller lists and/or win a major prize. It has been suggested that there's a better chance of winning the lotto in the US, 1 in 300 million, or being struck by lightning twice, 1 in 9 million, than writing a book, getting it traditionally published, and making the bestseller lists. From the point of view of most authors, then, the publishing world is both incompetent and inefficient. Now, don't get me wrong, I've worked with some marvellous people in the industry, editors, agents, publicists. I'm not trying to criticise individuals at all, but to highlight the ways in which corporate publishing has grown ever more distant from writers' needs. The current system isn't geared to writers at all. It is, in fact, a hostile world for most of us. The interface between the writer and the commercial world was always problematic, and it's even more fraught today. It's more and more difficult to earn a living as a writer or to guarantee a career in publishing. One major problem as I see it is that authors who have been dropped by publishers or who are unable to find their books in any bookshops to win awards or be reviewed internalise the situation as their own personal failure. I've seen so many writers lose confidence, give up, and become clinically depressed about something which is actually not their fault at all, but the inevitable result of the industry's business model. Is there another way forward? How can writers develop a resistance to the corrosive effects of dealing with the publishing world? Commercial publishing might work for you. It obviously does for some people. Happily, today, if it doesn't, there are more alternatives to try, and we'll look at some of these in another episode. And I'll be talking about how to recover from the experience of internalizing a sense of failure. Meanwhile, I would love to hear your stories and to know what you think. This is Livi Michael saying goodbye for now and wishing you happy writing.